Ooh.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome
Wait.
to. Oh, okay.
Oh. All right, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Black in Microbiology Week 2023. I am Dr. Nanisha Scott, your Director of Programming for Black Microbiology Association. I am a Black woman with shoulder-length brown hair with a white top. I am overjoyed and excited that you are here with us to learn, discuss, network, and/or collaborate with other participants of the conference. I'm delighted and honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Sherrice Allen. Dr. Allen serves as the program officer with the Inclusive Excellence 3 initiative at Howard Hughes Medical Institute, or HHMI. This initiative is focused on building institutional capacity for inclusion of all students in science. Prior to joining HHMI, Dr. Allen was an experienced educator and researcher and held faculty positions or appointments at Fayetteville State University, North Carolina Central University, my alma mater, shout out to NCCU, okay, and Campbell University. She also served as an independent educational consultant with SVA1 Consulting LLC and the STEM Partnership Coordinator for the North Carolina Center for After School Programs at the Public School Forum of North Carolina. Dr. Allen's dedication to excellence in teaching, service, and research earned her several departmental and college awards and honors. With over 20 years experience in higher education, Dr. Allen remains committed to engaging in efforts to diversify the STEM workforce at the undergraduate, graduate, and faculty levels. Personally, I know Dr. Allen to be a phenomenal scientist, very much an advocate and a mentor to a lot of us within the science field, as well as an excellent role model for all of us. Please welcome Dr. Allen.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Scott. It is a pleasure to be here with you all. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Just a moment. Technology is not always my best friend, but we're going to make it work today. Yeah, I got the right one. Can everybody see everything? See the screen okay? All righty. So once again, my name is Dr. Allen, and I will be speaking to you today on a topic that's very dear to my heart, community building. So the title of my presentation is Together We Rise, Divided We Fall, the Power of Community in Transforming STEM Education. And as the quote says on the screen, there is no power for change greater than a community. It allows you to discover what it cares about, and it pushes the agenda that is set forth by the community. My presentation today will follow this outline. First, I'll talk about what do we know thus far in STEM education. Secondly, how will we lead change in STEM education? Thirdly, I'll discuss how do we prepare for this great challenge? And finally, how do we find partners to help sustain the community that we are building around inclusion and equity in STEM education? So how do we know? So to advance innovation and discovery in STEM, research and in education, we must know what has occurred in the past. The discoveries of the past in microbiology has served as the foundation for discoveries and advancement in the discipline that we know of today. And what we learn today will also lay the foundation of the work that is going to be done in the future. So I will begin today by first talking about what we know about microbiology as a discipline and how it informs the efforts of the future. So microbiology, as all of you all know, as a member and part of this Black Microbiologists Association, microbiology is the study of microscopic organisms. Those organisms cannot be seen with the naked eye. And the categories or types of organisms studied are viruses, bacteria, algae, fungi, slime molds, and protozoa. So when we look at the first part of the slide, we'll look at what happened in the past. So I gave some of the starting scientists and their discoveries that laid down the foundation for microbiology. From using the crude microscopes to observe microorganisms to the development of the first antibiotic, the expansion of microbiology as a field was largely driven by the improvements over time and the efforts of many to improve microbiological techniques and technology, laying the foundation for what we are doing, what we know to do today in modern medical microbiology. During the 20th century, there was an explosion of great advances in microbiology. And during this time, it became one of the central basic sciences for other disciplines that were later derived from it. During the 20th century, we had advancements in microscopy and various microbiological techniques and the discovery of antibiotics, as well as DNA as the hereditary material. And during this time frame, various subdisciplines emerged from the microbiology. There's such as microbial genetics, molecular biology. And these advancements allowed the major discoveries during this time frame to take place. And so during this time, we are called an era of golden age of microbiology. And this is a time when we had rapid advancements in discovery that helped lay down, as I said before, the critical foundations of microbiology as a true science. So what do we know today? Presently, we see microbiology is now a multidisciplinary field. It has a diversity of applications that are seen in medicine, in agriculture, in industry, as well as in the environmental sciences. With the advancements made in molecular biology and genomics, the study of microorganisms have been transformed. We no longer just study bacteria or viruses from the outside. We are able to now extract their DNA, RNA, and study them more extensively. And so today's microbiologists are involved in discovery and innovations on various fronts that are helping to support or drive what we know about microbial pathogenesis, around ecology, and biotechnology. So microorganisms have multiple uses that are beneficial to us in society today. So what's in store for the future in microbiology? So in the future, there's going to be, as we know, just coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, we're going to need very rapid diagnosis of abilities to rapidly diagnose disease. We're going to need standardization of testing and greater adaptability to cope with new threats from infectious microorganisms such as that could be used now as agents of bioterrorism. Also, we are beginning to have a necessity, as we saw with COVID-19, to begin to understand what are the emerging pathogens, as well as the re-emerging pathogens from the past that are a threat to our human existence. Some of the anticipated directions that are occurring, that will become occurring now and continue to occur in the future, is research around microbial biomes. You want to understand the relationship of the microbiome in human health. There's also a need for the future to understand the process of antimicrobial resistance, as well as how do we determine or develop alternatives to the antimicrobial agents we currently have on the market. The future microbiology will rely on studying emerging diseases, and we need to develop rapid tools for diagnosis, for surveillance, and for intervention strategies. There will be a growing need for expertise of the new microbiologists to have training in bioinformatics and genomics to be able to annotate and analyze large amounts of microbial data that is being generated today. We will continue to utilize, we need to identify innovative infection models that can be used for the discovery and prevention of the emerging as well as re-emerging pathogens and future causes of pandemics that we hopefully will not see. And so in the future of microbiology will depend on the discovery of novel therapeutics and vaccines. But the work that's going to be done or will be necessary in the future will not be done single-handedly. It will rely on partnerships and community. So for microbiologists or for microbiology in the future, those training to become microbiologists will now rely on the need to identify interdisciplinary approaches. You will no longer just have microbiologists at the bench doing the work, but they will bring in other partners from across various disciplines in science, as well as the humanities and social sciences. Microbiologists in the future will now have to take a more active role in fostering scientific communication and engaging in outreach. As microbiologists, we have the moral obligation to share factual scientific information with the general public. We saw that being tremendously eroded during the COVID pandemic, where false information around disease transmission, vaccination was spread throughout our different communities. And we also, because in marginalized communities, there is a distrust of the scientific and medical communities. And so as officers of scientific communication, microbiologists are able to explain to our local communities and abroad the truth around microbiology and the organisms that we study. Microbiologists will also be required to take an active role in outreach, beginning to build partnerships and relationships with K-12 and informal science professionals. And you may ask why? Because you want to be able to build those relationships and partnerships to build a community that will now begin to integrate aspects of STEM to younger students. We cannot wait until they come to college. We want them to begin to develop the skill set as well as a mindset around having a STEM identity. And you want them to continue to have that love for discovery and to have a sense of belonging in the academy. And the earlier you start, the more developed and defined these traits, characteristics and character traits can be. As we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic, microbiologists are now also serving as agents of change. When during the COVID-19 pandemic, when institutions were forced to go to hybrid teaching modes or totally virtually, there was a lack, sometimes equity and inclusion in the STEM education arena was lost. So microbiologists will now serve as agents of change to help foster diverse and inclusive scientific communities that will match up or mirror the social demographics of society, of our nation. Microbiologists as agents of change are now drivers to help provide safe and welcoming environments, which we call safe spaces, within classrooms as well as in laboratories. And we want those in welcoming environments to support the growth and development of all members of society. So who will lead this change? So we talked about where we were, what do we know? So we built a foundation of what we know based on past experiences in microbiology up to the future. And we know that microbiologists will now be called not to just be to engage in research, but also have a social activist modality associated with their work. So who will lead the change? How will we foster inclusion in STEM education so that all students, regardless of how they show up, regardless of their lived experiences, that they will feel welcome and that they belong? As we look at current microbiology textbooks, we notice that the contribution of historically underrepresented minority and women identified scientists are absent. It is as if their efforts were erased, and this lack of inclusion of our stories further demonstrate how the dominant narratives that we see so often being utilized or put forth have shaped STEM education in America. Did you know that the first African American to earn a PhD in bacteriology and the first African American woman to earn a PhD in the natural sciences was Dr. Ruth Ella Moore? And that in 1947, she became the first African American person to become a member of the American Society of Microbiology. In fact, from 1932 to 1948, there were 12 Black microbiologists who received PhDs in microbiology. But only 2 of those 12 went on to join and be active members in ASM, or the American Society of Microbiology. And what hampered them was the backdrop of what was going on in the nation. With Jim Crow and active discrimination, African Americans or people of color were not allowed to maneuver through those different venues. And so a lot of the work that we did never got put into the textbooks that we all read. When I showed the slide earlier with those scientists who did discoveries in the past, they were predominantly male and predominantly white. We didn't see the names of people that looked like me in those textbooks. Also, in your textbook, did you ever come across the name of Dr. Harold Amos or Dr. Jane Hinton? I didn't, but I found out in my studies that Dr. Amos received a degree, his MD and PhD degrees from Harvard Medical School, and that he eventually went on to be the first African-American microbiologist with an opportunity to study in the Pasteur Institute. Well, Dr. Hinton, her name sounds really familiar. If you've done any kind of antibiotic susceptibility testing, you've heard of the Mueller-Hinton broth. Well, Dr. Hinton was a major contributor to the development of that agar, which has allowed us to now be able to test antibiotics against microorganisms and seeing how susceptible or resistant they are to those antibiotics. Also, in 1949, Dr. Hinton went on to receive her veterinary medicine degree in America, being one of the 2 first African-American women to earn that degree. But in my science textbook, I didn't read about these people, the men or the women. There is a lack of inclusion that must be eradicated. So who will lead efforts that foster inclusion in STEM? We, the older generation of scientists and researchers and educators, we're looking at the next generation of young researchers and academicians. And it will be through the power of community, of like-minded people focused on one goal. But that community cannot be monolithic. It has to be diverse, where different perspectives and lived experiences would influence the decisions and the trajectory of the science that we undertake. It is through the power of community that transformation in STEM education, by changing the narrative of whose stories we tell and whose stories we put forth, will take place. You all have begun to do this through the Black Microbiology Association. This is a community of thought leaders, change agents, and movers and shakers in STEM education and higher ed altogether. This is a collective body that has led the way to advocate and elevate the stories and accomplishments of minority scientists in America. So in addition to the Association of Microbiology, the Black Microbiologists Association, who will lead our nation in building capacity for inclusion in STEM, education as well as in research. It will be me as well as you. We have been summoned to the call to lead, to transform STEM education so that the next generation will not have to experience the microaggressions, the stereotype threats, all the barriers of exclusion that we have faced throughout our academic and professional careers. So who will lead the change? How do we prepare the person to lead the change? So inclusion is the hallmark for excellence to occur in STEM education. Excuse me. STEM education was built on and continues to be sustained by a foundation of anti-inclusive policies and practices. The current foundational framework of STEM education that we know of today embodies hegemonic values that uphold the white male scientist persona. Those are the stories we read about in the textbooks and we hear about in the news. These are the ones that get the Nobel Prize in our various disciplines of science. So the current structure of STEM education promotes a culture and a curriculum that has been designed to undermine the potential as well as the persistence of underrepresented minorities, whether they be students, faculty, or staff. And it's just this pervasive, inequitable system that prevents the migration or the translation or the movement of students up the ranks until full professor faculty positions. And these systemic barriers that we've seen in the past are unfortunately in 2023, these same systemic barriers continue to devalue the intellectual abilities of underrepresented racialized minorities. And when those barriers and those actions that align with those barriers are socialized in our educational frameworks, this signals to students, faculty, and staff that they don't belong or fit in with the norms of a STEM discipline. So how do we change this? How do we change the trajectory of STEM education so that all students, all faculty, all staff, regardless of how they look, how old they are, what their sexual orientation is, that they can come in and be contributors to and preeminent contributors to STEM education as well as STEM research. And it's through a system that is built on an approach based on the premise that academic excellence can be achieved when there is excellence in diversity and inclusion. And that is in an inclusive excellence framework. As Dr. Scott spoke of, the work that I do at HHMI focuses on inclusive excellence and building capacities, helping institutions to build capacities so that learning environments, whether it be the classroom or the laboratory, become inclusive and inviting, and students are valued and they are seen as experts, and that they are a part of the educational scientific ecosystem. So how do we implement the guiding principles of inclusive excellence? It will be through communities, by forming communities at every level, whether it be student peer groups, faculty learning communities, or different affinity groups that exist on our campuses, as well as in our granting agencies, our funding agencies, as well as in our scientific societies. We can build communities that act as drivers of inclusive excellence in STEM education. So inclusive excellence has a series of guiding principles that when you begin to do the work of inclusion, to transform STEM education, each community engaged in this work should rely on these guiding principles to help move work forward. So the first step of identifying for this community action to take place, it is necessary that we support inclusive practices that reinforce resiliency of students who have been historically marginalized in their educational pursuits. We must first build awareness about the importance of inclusion, and as change agents through a community platform, begin to assess the levels of inclusive practices that are underway at our various institutions or in our workplaces. And we need to look at the institutional practices at various levels, at the departmental level, as well as the institutional level, and as well as at the higher educational system level. So inclusive practices are necessary to change STEM education and foster a place where all feel that they are valued and appreciated, and that their science has meaning to everyone. The first question to ask when you are doing work in around inclusive excellence is to consider the impact of anything that you implement on your campus or in your workspaces. You want to ask, who is being left out? If we implement this approach or this policy or practice, who is going to be impacted negatively? Who is going to be impacted positively? And that kind of questioning will help determine whether these inclusive practices or a practice you are considering should go forth or be put to the side and look for something different. Thirdly, when we incorporate inclusive practices, we want to seek to transform the organization, be it a classroom space, a research lab, a funding agency, our scientific societies. We have to first transform practices, policies that will impact the culture. That will help change the culture. And to do this, you have to provide individuals with the tools and resources that they need to support their success. And this must occur, this changing or transformation of practices, policies, and culture has to begin at the highest level of the organization. We have to leverage institutional leadership to act as vehicles for inclusion by first having leadership of the organization recognize their own identities and the identities of others. The institutional leadership must also encourage the participation of allies and incorporate principles of inclusive excellence into the institution's mission, their core values, as well as their practices. So when you incorporate inclusive practices, you must show that or ensure that everyone, regardless of their backgrounds or identities, in your organization, in your classroom, in your laboratory, that they feel that they belong. and that they are supported and seen as major contributors to the STEM enterprise. So how do you begin to lead change? So we talked about we're going to build communities. We're going to build awareness and incorporate inclusive practices. But how do you begin to lead change? First, we have to foster inclusion in laboratory environments by identifying or looking at the demographic diversity of our institution. By looking at the demographic diversity, that is not enough. We know representation matters, but you don't want to increase diversity, but put everybody in a toxic environment where their learning is stifled, or they feel, and their mental and emotional well-being is threatened because of the stress that they experience in those environments. Secondly, to transform the culture and climate, first ask, you identify, is this culture and climate situated to foster student STEM identity? Is this climate or is this culture in your classroom or in the laboratory? Is it fostering or helping students to increase or further develop self-efficacy in STEM? Is it fostering social relationships with their peers and mentors? And are they being recognized for their knowledge and skills that they are developing in STEM? We also want to remove the isolation and learning they experienced by underrepresented groups. No longer are we going to utilize the narrative that aligns to the dominant culture that we see in STEM, especially in higher education. We have to be intentional to foster strategies that allow students to feel valued, appreciated, and that they belong, and that they know they have the skill set and the mindset to do great things in the STEM arena. Fourth, we have to look at, when we're looking at learning and laboratory environments, making them inclusive, we have to look at the curriculum and the teaching strategies or pedagogies that are going to be utilized, that are in place now, and look at how do we transform or change the curriculum and the pedagogies that we have more inclusion of the narratives and the stories of all demographic groups, all genders, all sexual orientations, that those lived experiences of everyone in STEM can be integrated in the classroom environment and as well as in the laboratory. That we see that all have been contributors to the movement of STEM in America. It wasn't just one type of person that have been moving the needle in STEM education. And we must welcome all as contributors to this discourse. We need allies as well as we need change agents. But most importantly, in the work of creating an inclusive laboratory or an inclusive classroom, there must be mutual respect shown by all stakeholders, regardless of their culture, race, ethnic characteristics. And we're not seeing anyone as a minority, but they are part of the norm or the mainstream. That the face of science does not look one way, doesn't show up or present one particular way. That we are all contributors to the scientific enterprise. So we talked about what we knew, and we talked about what we needed to do to lead by engaging in community, to operationalize STEM, to operationalize inclusive excellence. But how do we make ready those who are going to be the change agents, the driver of transforming STEM education. We are able to lead this change, not by ourselves, but through the power of community. In community, members feel both seen and they feel safe. Members of a community have established values, guiding principles, and you lay out rules for engagement. Communities serve a unique purpose or outcome for their members. And forming a community gives space for people to thrive in their personal life, as well as in their chosen STEM disciplines. They don't have to come into an organization and leave who they are at the door and assimilate into the culture that is considered norm in science. So when we look at as the quote says, every successful individual knows that his or her achievement depends on a community of persons working together. So what is community? So community has different definitions, but communities provide support and encouragement. The members have your back. When you get tired, they are the ones that encourage you, push you forward, and help you remain resilient throughout your trajectory from undergrad, grad, and whatever your chosen career field may be. So when I likewise had to depend on community, in second grade, I decided that I wanted to be either a mathematician or a scientist. That was back a long time ago. But my journey to where I am now as a program officer at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute wasn't a journey that I took by myself. I had a very strong community foundation. My first community was my immediate family and my relatives back in North Carolina. They were the ones that stayed up with me when I had to do papers or do homework. And when I wanted to quit, that wasn't an option. And they supported me emotionally as well as financially when I needed that help. When I got to college, my community grew. My college friends that were in my major, as well as my sorority sisters, became advocates for me to move forward in STEM. And they continue to do the same today. But at each level of my academic progression, as well as career progression, my network or my community grew. And each time, as the community grew, there were sub-communities with different purposes and needs. It was my teachers, mentors, and advisors that helped me begin to develop my identity as a woman of color in science. And I also began to develop professionally by engaging in higher education, affinity, and leadership groups that had a goal or outcomes that I needed, as well as the knowledge and the unwritten rules that I needed to learn to progress up the ladder. So everyone, no matter who you are, will rely on community. And with community, we can transform STEM education. In my work at HHMI, one of the communities that I work with relies on professional learning communities. The professional learning communities are comprised of faculty members that are leading change to transform STEM education. The learning communities are focused on the outcome or the goal of improving student learning. Members of the community, of a professional learning community, will engage in building, in community building that will integrate existing norms, expertise, and practices that come from members of the community. The educators within a professional learning community support one another when they engage in collaborative learning, the sharing of knowledge, the sharing of skills, but also the sharing of the unwritten rules in higher education. And this is all done to improve their teaching effectiveness that lead to higher student outcomes. And so when you look at the improvement of learning, how does it take place within the community? It is through collaboration, engaging in professional development to fill in the knowledge gaps and skill gaps within your chosen discipline or field of study. But a key part of a professional learning community that is necessary to transform STEM education is to reflect on what is my role, how have I been created barriers in this process of STEM education. And the process of reflection allows members to assess if changes in their approach, practices, or vision about teaching should change. And once you engage in reflection, that allows you and members of the professional learning community to level set and develop their marching orders, if you will, that are aligned with student learning as an outcome, but also the growth and development of all members. So as I said at the very beginning of the slide, is that the goal of a professional learning community is to improve learning opportunities and outcomes for students. They have been shown to impact retention and engagement in STEM, as well as professional learning communities are impacting large-scale reform across STEM education. And that is the work that I am doing now at HHMI to provide funding to support this type of work. The professional learning community are at the faculty level, but how can institutions use community to transform STEM education? So the HBCUs are a great example of community in action. HBCUs, despite their historically being underfunded and under-resourced, these institutions, through community, have produced the top talent in STEM in our country. HBCUs play a large part in preparing first generation as well as low-income African-American students that thrive and are successful in STEM. They go on to graduate school. They go on to professional careers in STEM, in the academy, as well as other branches of science and in industry. HBCUs provide the resources and the guidance that students often lack long before they come to the university. So because of HBCUs, African-American graduates are entering STEM advanced degree programs better equipped to thrive in college and to graduate and then to find a successful career in STEM. So this model is an entire institution, a university, that is focused on community building in support of faculty, staff, and students to engage in retaining the students, as well as making sure they matriculate and graduate and move on into their chosen career paths. In 2025, the Gallup study of HBCU graduates said that at an HBCU, because of this community environment that you see at an HBCU, they experience the emotional support that is necessary for success in STEM. African-American HBCU graduates says that professors care about them as a person, made them feel excited about learning. And they also spoke of how their that the mentoring they received encouraged them to pursue their goals and dreams. They did not experienced a deficit speech coming towards them. It was always about growth and development over time. These graduates from HBCUs also stated that they were involved in more experiential learning opportunities than their colleagues at other PWI or predominantly white institutions. And these experiential learning opportunities allow them to develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills, as well as work collaboratively in teams. So these HBCU provide the learning environments that are able to cultivate the skill set, the knowledge, but also the identity that students need to progress and be successful in STEM, to know that they are valued, to know that they have a whole community, a whole institution that is invested in their success and their growth and development as a contributor in STEM. So, what is the secret to success for HBCUs in STEM education? As I said, through community, they build social relationships. They allow students to build relationships with their peers, as well as build relationships with faculty and staff that support them and help to foster a sense of belonging, leading to academic and career success. HBCUs use the power of community. And so HBCUs should be looked at because they have so much to offer others to learn from. So rather than relying on predominantly white institutions to lead the way for diversifying STEM higher education, these institutions, their leaders, should look towards HBCUs because they have been successful. The previous slide, the stats were shown. Researchers and practitioners at PWIs can learn from the leadership styles and strategies that are implemented by faculty and administrators at HBCUs that have led to the success in preparing STEM students that we have seen since their inception. To continue leading the way in diversifying STEM education, HBCUs will need additional financial support to make attending more affordable, to reduce the financial burden of the students that they are training, to help dismantle the disparities that may be encountered as you are progressing through the STEM ecosystem. They need additional financial support so they can have labs that are innovative and have access to resources that our students, the peers of our students, may have at predominantly white institutions. So HBCUs, as I said, is a vehicle for change because they utilize the power of community and have been able to transform as well as diversify the STEM ecosystem. So institutions such as HBCU, to continue this work, must build and sustain partnership with various types of funders. So who are the partners that we need to engage with these communities that we see at HBCUs and other communities at PWIs? These partners, you must have mutually beneficial partnerships to promote STEM education collaboration among educators, institutions of higher learning, and funders, as well as scientific societies, are necessary and should be designed where both sides benefit from this arrangement. So who funds STEM education as well as microbiological initiatives today? There are various partners, but the partners that come forth must, as I said before, engage in mutual beneficial partnerships. And these partnerships must be equity-centered, where both parties exhibit values of responsibility, integrity, inclusiveness, and excellence. all undergirded by a framework of equity. And those partners are very broad. You have federal agencies, non-governmental agencies, philanthropic, as well as nonprofit organizations, as well as industry. So the federal and state agencies, as most of you all know, are the primary funders of STEM education and research. But these funding agencies also have intrinsic barriers that impact underrepresented racialized minority faculty as well as students. And they impact the level of science, the progression of science that can take place on institutions such as other minority institutions as HBCUs, tribal colleges, as well as in community colleges. So these agencies have to also look internally at themselves to ensure that they are not serving as barriers that are impacting underrepresented and racially minoritized and woman-identified faculty, as well as minority-serving institutions. In addition, the private and non-governmental agencies, they play a vital role in promoting innovation and research by supporting research directly to funding internships, fellowships, as well as the development of curriculums and pedagogies, as well as other programs. So they have a vital role as well. So inclusive strategies are necessary and needed to ensure that equity in funding and those mutually beneficial partnerships can take place in STEM education. They require institutions to develop, these funding agencies should require institutions to develop policies to track their data and track the progression and movement of students up through the ranks, as well as faculty through the ranks in STEM. And use those metrics to determine if they are ready to receive funding from those agencies. In addition, funding agencies working in conjunction with institutions should begin to look at their own metrics and consider if DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion and priorities have been integrated within their policies and their funding criteria. They need to look at who are we selecting to serve on review panels. Is our process equitable? Are we not bringing the right people to the table? How can we assist institutions as well as individual faculty and students in developing their skill sets to develop grant proposals? And making sure there is access to the information that these funders share out, that majority institutions or predominantly white institutions may have a greater foothold into these areas. But finally, the diversity of reviewers are definitely critical. If the reviewers think don't have a high opinion of historically Black colleges and universities or tribal colleges, when they're reviewing a grant from these institutions, they will not consider them worthy because of the barriers they have in their mindset that has historically and continually, unfortunately, have been barriers to the progression of STEM and STEM education. So, as I said before at the very beginning, it takes community. Community is a driver that is necessary to transform STEM education. And community occurs at multiple levels. And each successful person in STEM, if you talk to them, they will tell you unequivocally that they did not go this journey alone. But it was through their communities at various levels and at various times that were able to support them and move forward. And as a graduate of an HBCU, Fayetteville State University, where I received my master's degree in biology, it was community and my mentors that allowed me to change my mindset, develop an identity of a scientist, and prepared me for the career trajectory that I'm currently on. And so community is essential. We have to stand together, especially underrepresented, racially minoritized, and populations, so that the barriers experienced in STEM that we still see prevalent today can be eradicated and changed, and a new normal and a new narrative where we all exist and thrive in the STEM ecosystem can take place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Allen. That was phenomenal. I learned so much and I identified with so many of the points that you had throughout your presentation. We just want to say thank you to HHMI for sponsoring today's this keynote, and as well as STEM Ed Education Day. Quickly before we go, we want to just answer some questions. So we have a couple of questions in the Q&A. How can we continue to communicate and demonstrate the importance of inclusive excellence and further the mission in face of the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action?
So it's going to be through grassroots efforts such as the Black Microbiology Association and other affinity groups. It's going to be through community, and that we have to no longer, as I said, for the future of STEM, education and research, the next generation have to now, we don't have the luxury of just being scientists. We have to be activists. We have to be crusaders of social justice. That we have to be communicators of truth. We cannot sit on the sidelines. We've got to be the ones that are on these scientific boards where decisions are being made. We have to rally together and support one another and begin to learn and communicate with one another in our communities, these unwritten rules. But we can't do it alone. We need allies that don't look like us. We need people who will serve as sponsors, who are in rooms where we may never be, that speak our name and bring us into the fold. And once we get there, we can't forget who we are. We got to remember, we got to always reach back and bring some others with us. And we continue to build that pipeline, or I don't like the word pipeline. We continue to build a community of support, a community of networking, a community of information sharing, a community that fosters resilience and allow when you feel that you're about to fall, you got somebody pushing you up. And even though the Supreme Court decision has taken place, we did not have affirmative action when those first 3 scientists that I talked about today made their footprint in STEM. But it was through their perseverance, and for most of us that look like me, it was our faith in a higher power that allowed us for doors to be open that may not have ever been open before. But it came through our community. We relied on one another, and we pushed forward those who we knew had the ability to go forward. I am the only woman in my family with a PhD. I have males in my family with PhDs. But they supported me, they encouraged me, they were a part of my community as well. So I don't see the affirmative action as it may be a way, as a barrier, but when there is a will, there is a way. We will figure out how to get into those rooms so we can hear. We'll keep our ears to the ground and begin to strategize as you all are doing in this organization. And so that's how change can come, through different grassroots organizations and groups, from us getting together and talking about what is our playbook, okay? Everybody else got a playbook in America to dismantle D&I. What is our playbook? So you all are the generation to start thinking that. We've got to go back to the Martin Luther King kind of thinking, that we have to become radical, not radical to get locked up, but radical enough to know how to change the trajectory of the governmental foundations and the attitudes of those who are trying to set barriers and blockage preventing our success in STEM education.
No, I think that's a wonderful answer. And I think that gives us a lot to think on as we progress throughout the week for Black and Micro Week 2023. Everyone, thank you so much for attending. Once again, we would like to thank our sponsor, HHMI or Howard Hughes Medical Institute, for sponsoring today's panel. And I'm excited, and all of BMA, we're excited, and we look forward to you joining us later today at 12 p.m. Eastern Time for our STEM education panel, featuring a lot of great panelists that I think you want to hear from, and it will be moderated by Dr. Danielle Graham. So please continue to use the WOVA app and discuss and talk and collaborate with participants. Talk to us as the organizers, and we just look forward to you enjoying the rest of the week. So thank you so much for coming, and we will see you later today and this week. Bye, everyone.